Hey everybody, welcome to class. This week what I thought I would do is go over the final paper. Now as you know, we have a final cumulative paper in this class, and it's called the Personal Leadership Development Assessment and Growth Plan, or the PLDGRP. Just kidding. Got you there, right? So what I want to do in this video is I want to go over this paper, I want to explain the components, and I want to share really what I feel are some of the essential components of this, because I want you to write a great paper and I want you to get a great grade. All right, so what I'll do in this video is I'll highlight the main points. There's really 7 main sections to this paper. Count them, 7 main sections to this paper. And so I want to go through each section, and then I want to go through the evaluation, and I want to show you exactly how I'm going to be grading this paper so that you know what I'm going to be looking at when I do the grade. It's sometimes, it's a mystery to me, but somehow students hand in these papers and there's a complete disconnect from the instructions and they wonder why they don't get a great grade. I don't want to make it a mystery. I don't want to make it a secret. I want you to know exactly what should be in the paper and how you can get a good grade on this so that your grade comes back and it's what you want it to be, all right? And it reflects the work that you put into it. So without any further ado, what you should probably do if you haven't done recently is to pull out the syllabus and go to the assignments and look at that Personal Leadership Development Assessment Growth Plan, or the PLDGRP. All right, so here we go. Okay, just to read through the description here, it says that the participants will create a personal leadership development assessment, and that should say and growth plan. This assessment will reflect principles from the course and implications for the student's current season of leadership development. This project will be as many pages as it needs to be to effectively apply the course content, but should not exceed 15 pages. The paper should follow the King's Style Manual format and include the following sections. Okay, so let me just speak briefly here about the page requirements. Don't exceed 15. And you might be thinking, oh great, I'm just going to write a 3-page paper. Well, guess what? If you write a 3-pager, chances are you're not going to be able to cover all the essential elements in here, at least do them justice. So if you want to kind of take the easy route and just write a 3 or a 5-page paper, go ahead, but chances are it's not going to be adequate, okay? So maybe I should have put a minimum in there, but you guys are adults, and and again, to me, a leadership competency is developing the ability to reason and think critically, and of course, not to take the easy route, right? So while it'll be easy to write a 3-page paper, that's not going to give you the best really reflection of your learning in this class, and it certainly won't get an A. So if I had to set a minimum, I would say like 12 pages. Okay, so if you want a number, there it is, 12 pages, I said it. But don't go over 15, okay? So enough said about that. Oh, one other thing too, I did mention the King's Style Manual in here. This is very close to the Chicago/Turabian writing style. So if you follow those, I'm fine. And there's some great resources out there if you haven't already discovered. Purdue University's OWL, O-W-L, which is the online writing lab. They have a whole section there on Chicago, and it's got everything you need to know for citations, bibliography, margins, fonts, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so anyhow, that should help you, and that's important to me that you put it in that format, all right? The first thing I look at is I start to look at some of those format issues, and you'll lose points for that right away. So please make sure you pay attention to that and that you use the appropriate format. All right, so let's take a look at some of the specifics of the paper. Point number 1, introduction including thesis statement. Okay, so this should be a good paragraph or 2, which really explains what the paper is going to be about. So a good introduction should be compelling. It should make the reader want to read on. It should give a little bit of background and context, maybe about you, maybe about the paper. Don't put your testimony in here. This isn't the place for your testimony. And sometimes people feel that an introduction means, oh, the reader wants to know everything about my life and how I came to Christ and all those kinds of things. It's not exactly what I'm looking for here. You can add some of those elements later on. We'll talk about that in a bit. But your introduction really should just be a little bit of context, current context, maybe the content of the class and the kinds of things that we've learned in the class, maybe a major takeaway that you've had from the class, kind of a summative statement, and then a thesis statement. And a thesis statement to me should always state the purpose of the paper. So if the reader just needed to know one thing, what the paper was going to be about. They could read this thesis statement and it would be clear as a bell. In this paper, I am going to, discuss everything I've learned in this class and develop an assessment plan for my growth as a leader. Boom. All right. That's really all you got to say. But it should be clear, concise, and it should really focus the reader on what the paper is about. Okay, section 2, the overview of participants' leadership role and current organizational context. All right, so this is where you can kind of wax eloquent a little bit, talk about what you're doing in ministry, talk about your leadership, maybe give a little bit of background, but again, not your whole testimony and everything you've done before you showed up, but just a little bit of background and overview of what you're doing currently, the kinds of things you're doing, maybe how many people you're overseeing, those kinds of things. And then organizational context, maybe explain briefly what your organization is about. And again, I know people want to go on and talk about how wonderful their church is. This should be brief, maybe a paragraph or two in terms of the organizational context, okay? The next section, leadership development stage. Assessment of students' stage of leadership development based on both Clinton and Marco framework. This should include a brief summary of these concepts. Okay, now here you are going to demonstrate to me that you understand the key concepts of this book right here, right? And Clinton has a lot of good process stuff. Remember in this class we talked about the process model development. So make sure you articulate some of the key ideas of the process model and then put yourself in there, okay? So you need to explain how your life fits in here, where you are at some of these processes, in the maturity stage, right? The ministry maturing process he talks about, the multi-phase process he talks about, the life maturing process, the leadership challenge. Well, don't confuse that with the other book, right? Okay, so make sure you discuss concepts from this book and where your life fits in. And of course, my wonderful model, my 5-stage calling developmental model, right? Acceptance, activating, anguishing, acceptance, question mark, right? So think about that. We did a good discussion on that whole thing. So think about that and maybe, don't re-articulate your story per se, but maybe if you're kind of stuck somewhere in that, acceptance, anguishing, maybe there's some relational issues. And I know in the discussion board, a lot of you identified some of these things, some of these identity issues, right? So discuss my framework and then again, put your own life in there and to use that framework to explain or describe some of the maybe the season of life, the challenges of life, some of those sorts of things. Okay, let's move on to section number 4, leadership needs analysis. Assess the kind of challenges present in your current or immediate future context and what kind of leadership is needed and what specific leadership competencies you need in order to handle these. All right, so this is where you're going to talk about some of the specific kinds of challenges that you face currently, or maybe what it is that you're attempting to do in the future. So for example, let's say you're preparing for pastoral ministry, right? Maybe you're in a staff position, maybe you're in a youth staff position. I want you to talk about that. This is going to go a little bit beyond the context from above. In the intro, you set up your context, but here I want you to explain it in a specific leadership framework. So what are some of the specific kinds of leadership issues that you're dealing with? Are you at a stage of strategy development? Are you at a stage of people development? Is it a stage of organizational processes, right? So talk about what are some of the challenges that you face currently that you need to deal with, as well as some of the future expected kinds of issues too. So some of you might be in a pretty stable kind of place, but I know a lot of you are also kind of developing and you're growing and you're thinking about the future, right? So, and again, this might be a little ambiguous, it might be a little vague, but do your best to articulate the kinds of challenges that you face in order to address the leadership context, either real or expected in the future. All right, and then the real meat of this paper is the growth plan. So I want you to talk about specific, sustainable, concrete action steps needed for the participant to develop in the coming year. This should include reflection on Kouzes and Posner's model as well. Okay, so here is where I want you to deliver some of the things that you need to grow in, all right? So you're not the hero here. You're not the one who's got it all figured out and you're the pastor of a successful church or thriving youth group or whatever. Here's where you say, man, here's 5 things I need to develop in, and here's how I'm going to go about developing. So through this course, no doubt you've identified things in your life. You're saying, yeah, I'd really like to grow in that. Enabling others to act or challenging the process. Okay, so maybe in Coos and Posner, you read that chapter on challenging the process. And man, I don't do any of that. I pretty much go along for the ride. I just kind of do what everybody says. But now you're realizing leadership means speaking up, challenging the process, questioning why you're doing things. Is this necessary? Are we doing the right things, right? Remember the difference between leadership and management. Managers do things right. Leaders do the right things. So you might be saying, yeah, I need to challenge the process a little more and articulate that concept from Coos and Posner. Cite your sources, of course, and then say, here's some ways that I think I can do that. Our church is currently entering into a restart phase. We need some help in this area here, and I've always been thinking about this, and I'm going to, begin to articulate some ideas, maybe put some things on paper, maybe call a meeting of the leadership team, whatever it is that you have. But I want you to talk about ways. And also, too, I want you to kind of get personal here. And you might say, this has been a challenge for me. It's really a challenge for me to speak up. We don't really have a culture that appreciates people articulating the things. And that might be a very real challenge. And you might say, man, I don't know that I could really do this in this current context. So talk about that as well. And what can you do? Maybe you need to leave, right? Maybe you need to find a context. You might come to the end and say, I can't do any leadership where I currently am. Hallelujah. That's a great revelation, and that's a great point of self-awareness and understanding. So you might need to find other ways for you to actually grow as a leader, because the one that you're in isn't confining. Now, don't go and tell everybody, oh, Dr. Marco said I should leave my church. It's not what I'm saying. But what I want you to do is I want you to get real in this paper and say, what is it going to take for you to begin to grow as a leader, right? So that's what this class has been all about, is articulating leadership and thinking about how we can grow in leadership. So we said at the very beginning, leadership development requires certain things, right? It requires challenge, right? It requires support. It requires feedback. And you might be looking at your current context. I'm not getting any of those. This isn't challenging. Nobody's supporting me. Nobody's mentoring me. Nobody's giving me feedback about my performance, any of those kinds of things. So if you want to grow as a leader, you need to find a situation where you get all those kinds of things. So that might be part of the conclusion of your growth plan, is that I need to get into a situation where I actually have the challenge and support and feedback that I need to grow as a leader. Okay? So that's what you should put in that final section there. I want you to really articulate, maybe not all 5 of those points, but at least 3 of those points from Coos and Posner, and then put yourself in there and say, here's the things I need to grow in. Here's where some specific things that I can do, right? And don't think about 20 years. In the future someday I'm going to be a visionary leader. What's something you can do in the next year, 6 months, 3 months? Get concrete. And one of the things we know about leadership development too, and I articulated this early on in the class, is you have to have a concrete plan. You need to say, here's some specific steps and here's what I can do. And I know it's not always easy, but this is the chance for you to think about it and wrestle through it and say, here's the kind of things, here's the specific steps that I can take in order to help me grow as a leader, right? So this document here is kind of your manifesto. You're laying down the gauntlet. You're saying, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to grow as a leader. I'm tired of being where I am. I want to step up. I want to do amazing things for Jesus. And here is how I'm going to personally develop as a leader. All right, so go for it. Stretch yourself, challenge yourself, get real, get concrete, articulate the things that are important to you that you want to accomplish in the future. Okay, and then the final section is a conclusion. So this is where you kind of bring it all together and tie it in a nice little bow and give, maybe some parting shot. This shouldn't be that long, maybe a paragraph or 2, but it should really kind of summarize your paper, right? So you kind of go back through your paper and say, in this paper I said this and this and this, and I came up with a great plan, and Lord willing, by the grace of God, I'm going to accomplish all these things, something like that. And then, of course, your bibliography of sources cited. I've just given you 3 sources, right? At a minimum, you should cite, right? You should cite the Clinton book. You cite the Coos and Posner's book, our main books in this class. You should cite my model, right? You can do that just by citing, course material. There's a proper way in Chicago to cite referencing to online materials, to online course materials, okay? So you can find that out and then cite me. And I really encourage you, okay? I really encourage you to find some additional sources as well, right? So maybe there's something in this class, maybe the David Day article, okay? Remember that from the first few weeks? Maybe you want to go back on that and say, oh, there were some great ideas from that. I'm gonna use those and I'm gonna cite that article, right? So do a little bit extra research. I love that kind of stuff, right? Because you guys are juniors and seniors. You need to step up and demonstrate that you are familiar with the literature of the field, right? That you're not just taking the low-hanging fruit, but that you can know how to find resources and cite resources and use them for your own academic development. All right, so that's the paper, and now let's talk about how I'm going to evaluate the paper. Students should demonstrate knowledge of the key areas from the class textbook, as well as at least 3 additional outside sources. Be sure to cite your sources as appropriate. This project will be graded on. All right, here you go. 5 criteria for grading, right? This is my rubric right here. Demonstration of good working knowledge of the various concepts used in the class, citing sources as appropriate. Okay, so this is 30% of your paper. This is a big deal, right? You need to show me that you know the ideas. Don't just say, well, Coos and Posner talk about enabling others to act, or challenging the process, and then move on. You need to explain that. You need to cite them. You need to go in there and review that concept and re-articulate that concept in the paper for me. Okay, so I want to know that you understand these concepts and you can explain them, not just mention them, right? Oh, well, Marco's 5-stage calling model. That doesn't explain the model. That doesn't define and articulate. That doesn't show me that you have good working knowledge. It shows me that you have that title, that one idea in your head, but you have to explain the idea, right? So, and again, I know the ideas. You're thinking, well, he knows what they are. Why do I have to write them down? You're not just writing for me, right? You're writing for a larger audience. Here's always a good assumption in class, in a paper. Assume that the reader doesn't know anything about what you're talking about, right? The reader is not just the teacher who knows everything about this topic, but it's somebody, I'm going to present this to a friend, I'm going to present this to my pastor, to my boss, and I want them to explain, I want them to know what I've learned in this class. So you've got to articulate and define and explain all these cool things that you're learning in the class, all right? So 30% of your grade, I'm a stickler on this kind of thing. If I don't see any mention, if I don't see any explanations of key ideas, if I don't see citations from the books in the reading, I'm gonna mark you down for that. All right, so just know that I'm a stickler for this kind of stuff. All right, let's move on. Number 2, thoughtful personal reflections which demonstrate appropriate spiritual humility and understanding of areas of personal growth. All right, so I've talked about this a little bit. This isn't the paper where you talk about how wonderful you are, that you're the hero of the youth group, that you've got it all together, man. But I want to show that you actually learned something and you said, yeah, I need to grow here. The Lord spoke to me through this. I've got a plan here and I want to grow. Again, leadership in the kingdom is about showing appropriate humility and acknowledgement of shortcomings and self-awareness and saying, here's where I need to develop, okay? So don't, flog yourself with a wet noodle or anything, but just show me that, yeah, here's some things that you need to learn in the class. All right, so again, that whole plan part, you're going to articulate like a handful of things. You say, here's something I want to work on in the future that I think is going to help me to become a better leader. Now, this is a big part of your paper. This is 30%. Point number 3, thoughtful and workable plans and recommendations for personal growth. All right, another big chunk of the paper, another 30%. So this is your goal section, right? This is where you actually show me that you got a plan, you got some ideas, you got some concrete steps. Maybe you even have a time frame. Over the next 6 months, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But make it real specific and tangible. So if somebody said, well, what are you going to do? You show me you know about leadership. You show me you recognize some areas of personal growth. What are you going to do to address those things, right? So real kind of specific action steps. And you know what? It's always a good idea too, for clarity, to articulate things in terms of like first, second, third. First, next, finally, right? So don't just give me a big old run-on paragraph and lots of yada, 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 but say, here's one thing I'm going to do. Here's another thing I'm going to do. Here's a third thing I'm going to do. And finally, I'm going to do this, right? So again, your job is to lead the reader through the paper, to articulate each of these steps, right? So I would even encourage you to come up with an outline for your paper for all of these 3 main sections, right? The background section, personal growth section, and the growth plan, the specific concrete action step section, right? So what theories are you going to talk about, what concepts, what are specific areas of growth, what are some specific plans that you can do, right? So each of those, you can envision those. They're all going to come in sort of real concrete steps, discrete steps, if you will, that help the reader, in this case me, to really understand where you're going, okay? So clarity in your writing, clarity in articulation, these things is a big deal. It's a big deal to me, and it'll help you write a great paper and make a really compelling paper as well. And then the last couple points here: paper organization, mechanics, grammar, bibliography, etc. All right, so make sure you know how to cite your sources in that bibliography. Make sure it's organized well. Review your grammar. Some of you maybe might even want to have somebody else look at this afterwards, maybe somebody who's a good writer, to say, you got a little problem here. I have no problem with you having this reviewed if you feel like you need help. But this is important. You don't want to lose points for stupid little things. And sometimes, students get marked down because they forgot like a word or something. So proofread your stuff a lot. I noticed on the discussion board in this class, there was kind of a lot of sloppy jalopy writing, and I could tell people weren't really proofreading. You can't do that in this paper, right? You got to proofread for spelling and grammar and those sorts of things. And then finally, follow the TKU writing style guide. And again, it's so similar to Chicago. I will be fine if you just use Chicago altogether. And like I said, there's some great resources out there. This includes your front page, the way you head up the paper, your margins, your font sizes, the way you cite your sources, whether you do endnotes or footnotes. Either of those are acceptable in this approach. So, and then of course, make sure your name and identifying student information in the file. All right. So, all right. Well, that's about it. I hope this helped. I really am looking forward to seeing your papers. Again, this is kind of a cumulative exercise. You're going to pull from a lot of different areas in this class, and you're going to talk about how it applies to you. And hopefully, as you've been going through this class, you've already been thinking about these things. You've been discussing them in the discussion board as well, right? We've been doing that every week on some of the Coos and Posner's things. So you can go back, obviously, and kind of pull from some of your notes there. Don't just copy and paste it. This needs to be kind of a fresh document, but that you should have already started thinking about these things early into the class. So I hope this was helpful. God bless you guys. Let me know if you have any questions. I am here to help you should you need it. Take care.